has taken 1101.5 and 1101.5.1, combined the two, and it is the code language. And specifically 1101.5, and I'll look that up for you. It should be entitled subsoil drain and discharge. Those two sections combined in the body of the code reflect our amendment, and it gives us the option for inside or outside the footing for these foundation drains, and it's written the same in the code text. As such, we felt that it was no longer necessary to keep as an amendment. We could enforce the code as written on using those two sections.
Do we need to vote on that?
Since it's been approved once.
It was already approved. We just
once.
brought this back for clarification for the board's attention.
Okay.
Now, in moving forward now, what we will need is an action from the board once I present the International Fire Code. We'll need action from the board on that regard once we complete that. Basically, to approve a motion to direct staff and move forward with the code adoption process to include the 2012 International Fire Code. And with the Salina Municipal Code as presented, to approve a motion to direct staff to provide specified additional information, take specified additional action before making a decision, or other action as the board deems appropriate. And at the conclusion of this presentation of the International Fire Code, we'll begin with our minutes. These were the minutes that we had from that particular meeting on September 22nd. We had one meeting and we completed the task of reviewing the International Fire Code with the Salina Municipal Code amendments. It was brought to the board, to the subcommittee, and the subcommittee concluded that as presented, it would be brought back to the Building Advisory Board for their decision. And again, as we look at these codes, and we look at the Salina Municipal Code, these amendments to the code, you'll see that a lot of this, as we start out again, is administrative, and administrative is always per the local jurisdiction, so those will remain as amendments as written. And also, we'll always reference the current edition that we're seeking. In this case, it would be the 2012 International Fire Code, along with the appendices as recommended by the fire marshal and the code text itself, code body. Anything that you see, again, in this section, if it begins with a 100 series, 101, 102, 102.1, this is all administrative, and we're identifying the specific appendices that was requested to be adopted by the fire marshal and the city of Salina. Whenever you see something that is scratched through, as you do it with section 1445.3, that merely means that it's repetition. It was the same text, same verbiage as the 2012 version of the International Fire Code, and that's why it's been removed. We wanted to clarify, too, the reference code and standard, and we wanted to clarify any conflict between the two, whether it's a reference code and standard, that the provisions of the code, the International Fire Code, shall apply. And that's been made abundantly clear in the 2012 text. The amendments that you see next, we have not changed those because they are specific to our jurisdiction. Section 14-45.6, as you see, amendment section 106.2 is deleted because it is word for word what is in the 2012 code text. As such, it's no longer an amendment. Our next section addresses the governing or the appeal body, which is the Building Advisory Board, and we're going to keep that as it has been amended because it applies directly to this board. Section 14-46, we're looking at more definitions. Fire code official, fire watch. Some of these are are the same exact text as the 2012 International Fire Code. And the reason we're keeping these, some are not included in the 2012 as definitions, but they are subject to change. So, for instance, in the next code cycle, the 2015 or whatever we choose to adopt next, it'd be easy for us to amend this by keeping this text in place. Definitions do oftentimes change. One that's unique to us is non-climatized storage. The codes do not have this definition or reference it. And when we look at items like 14-48, only thing we're changing is we are referencing the exact code reference. As opposed to being 401.6, it's now 401.9. Simple things like that is the only changes that we've had to make. Again, when you see delete, we're looking at the same text, so it's no longer necessary to keep this as an amendment when it's already being enforced in code text and will be enforced with the code text. Again, you'll see references to basically section numbers and reorganizing section numbers and code numbers to reflect the changes. This may be one of the biggest changes that we made. We had quite a bit of discussion on this. The fire marshal, myself, our subcommittee, and address identification has been in the fire code text and the International Building Code text merely 4 inches high for many, many years with a 1/2 inch width stroke as far as the width of the lettering or the numbers. And it's quickly been discovered that if someone's business is 50 feet away from the street, it is not easy to identify the address for these buildings as for emergency personnel. So this is the reason for this table. This table's been readily adopted in other jurisdictions and other planning and zoning areas within different jurisdictions within not just the state of Kansas, but all over the United States, and this is fairly common now. So we are now going to enforce this as far as the minimum number height, the height of the numbers, the width of the numbers, and make it more readily or easily or easier for us to see these addresses when we're responding. Again, they're going to be installed on a contrasting background, plainly visible from the street or road fronting the property. And when required by the fire code official, address numbers shall be provided in additional approved locations and sizes to facilitate emergency response. For instance, at the rear door of maybe a strip mall where you have multiple tenants, you want to identify those doors on the rear there as well. It makes it easy for them to identify. And when it cannot be viewed from the public way, a monument, pole, or other approved sign or means shall be used to identify the structure. And address numbers are now shall be required to be maintained. If the letter or the number 1 falls off your address 101, we need to put the number 1 back so that we know that it's not address 01. The next sections that you see, we are looking at just UL references of actually referencing the appropriate reference as listed in the code body, in this case UL 1037. Fire hydrants, fire flows, those type things are specific to our jurisdiction, and we're going to keep the amendments as written because they are indeed specific to Salina, and they are specific to our needs here. We now have an identification standard. If we look at 509.1.2, the rooms containing the equipment, and we're talking about your fire sprinkler riser rooms, those type things, they're now required to be identified with a minimum of 4-inch high letters, a minimum 1/2 inch stroke on a contrasting background to identify those rooms, whether it's fire sprinkler room, fire alarm panel, whatever the case may be. Those rooms are now readily identified where those items are, so it's easy for our first responders to locate those. An example of something easy to see is your white reflective letters and symbols on a red background. It's always been very effective to use that color combination. Again, we're getting to more of our deletions here because if you look at the mixture of the red and the black text here that's been struck through, that is the exact verbiage of the 2012 International Fire Code. As such, our amendment is not necessary. We will keep the next amendment as written as it applies to artwork and the amount of artwork that's allowed. Starting with Section 901.6 of the International Fire Code, which is referenced to Section 14-53.1 of the Salina Municipal Code, you're going to see the next few sections, and it will be several sections, have been completely deleted because they are repetition. They are the same text for the most part as the International Fire Code, the 2012 version, and these are no longer necessary. And also, when we went through our International Building Code subcommittee and presentation back to the Building Advisory Board, these are the same exact sections. Chapter 9 and Chapter 7 are the exact same text in both bodies of the code, the International Building Code and the International Fire Code, and that's why we deleted it in both sections. It's the exact same section, the exact same verbiage. We are going to keep our use group A, as you see at 14-53. This has a tendency to change with every code cycle, thus the group A is one of the most prominent ones to change. Whether it be for nightclubs or other things, the code has a tendency to address those, especially if it's in the case of some kind of a catastrophe of some type. So we will keep this. The way you see the mixture of the red and the black here, it's almost word for word now as the 2012 International Fire Code, but again, 2015 version, when we go to do this again, it would be much easier for us to have this in place so we can make an amendment easily. On 14-53.2, this particular amendment we are taking to the State Fire Marshal's office for their approval as well because it is less restricted than the code requirements. However, in a previous when this was previously done, it was taken to the State Fire Marshal's office and obviously approved. And we are more restricted than what it was in the past, whereas 6 dwelling units or less, without basement, not more than 1 story in height, and provided such building not exceed 5,000 square feet, was an exemption to the sprinkler requirement. And now we have changed that to 4, and we've added the verbiage, and each dwelling unit is separated by no less than a 1-hour fire-resistant construction. No, our fire marshal, Mr. William, has been working on the text for this to send to the fire marshal's office. I'm not sure if he has completed that letter to send to them, but I'll be in contact with him this week, and we'll see how far along we are in submitting this. We will need their approval as well.
Jim, is this for like the apartments or like the ones that were being built? Or as an example of the ones being built out south?
No, the ones that are upcoming or been discussed to be built down south will be fully fire sprinkled. They're more than 1 story. They're more than
the ones that are already completed. Who built those, Darrell?
The ones on Kaywood, they're fourplex.
Are they fourplex?
Yeah, they're
Yeah.
fourplex.
It would apply to that. They're single story,
Yeah,
Right.
slab on grade, no basement,
right.
less than 5,000 square feet. They would meet this criteria.
over 4.
Anything over 4 would be sprinkled, or if it has a second story, or if it has a basement,
Yeah.
or if it's over 5,000 square feet.
If the fire marshal approves it.
Correct. Group S2 we're looking at, basically this mixture again of the red and black text is exact code requirements that we are going to be enforcing. The reason we are keeping this as an amendment, this is once again, it's like Group A, it's subject to change with the next code cycle, so it's safe. It would be safer for us to keep this body and keep this text as the way we have it written, so it'll be easy to change in the next code cycle. The next few sections you see, delete, 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 delete. Suffice it to say, when this is said and done, we will have a much more streamlined International Fire Code with Salina Municipal Code amendments.
Doesn't look like you took out enough amendments.
We took out a lot of amendments.
I'm only kidding.
As you keep seeing, we took out a lot of amendments. As we go through here too, you'll see some sections a little later here that we did not delete. Here, anything to do with, basically this is chapter 10 and it's section 1003. If you look at this section and you look at the International Building Code, you're going to see the same text. And this is specific to elevation changes, ramps, stairs, those type things. So we wanted these two sections, the International Fire Code and the International Building Code, as it relates to these sections, to mirror each other and say the exact same thing. And that's what we're doing. And we're also referencing the 2010 ADA Standards for Accessible Design, which is what we use for our ADA regulations. That was not included previously, so it was important to make sure that was clarified. Again, if it's deleted, it was repetition, it's the same text. Here we're looking at exit stairways, just as I said, and we are mirroring the same text as the International Building Code, so they're uniform, irregardless of which code body we're looking at. If we're referencing the International Fire Code or we're referencing the International Building Code, we will see the same text as it relates to the Salina Municipal Code amendments. Riser height, riser treads, again, is the same, making sure that we have the same text in both code bodies. Handrails, alternating treads. One thing we have added to this, section 1013.6, and we did the exact same thing in the International Building Code, just to refresh our memory on this, is we're now stating that yards located within 3 feet of a roof edge shall have toe boards installed to help prevent objects from falling off the roof during maintenance operations. We added that same verbiage in the International Building Code as well, as far as working near and around roof edges when they're servicing mechanical equipment, rooftop units, whatever the case may be, so that someone doesn't accidentally pick the wrench off of the roof and strike someone down below. Never a pleasant experience. So we want to make sure that we had that referenced in both bodies of the code.
Is that just a temporary, or is that already, I mean, is that built in?
It's going to be built in. It's going to be something they're going to have to go with the guardrail assembly that they're putting up because of the proximity of the roof. They have to install a guard anyway. We're asking that they install the toe kick basically as well.
Or the mechanic trips over the toe kick and flies off.
We cannot protect for all things as much as we try.
Well, I've known in my life I'd fall off.
This section, Division 2 fireworks, we did not change any of this. The only thing I changed, or the only thing that we changed in this code text is the reference numbers to the section numbers. Section 14.50, 14-55 as opposed to 14-57. We kept this exactly as it is because it has served us very well with the fireworks that we, especially the fireworks tents and those type of displays that we enforce here every year. And because it's worked so well, we are not going to change this. We will keep it as a Salina Municipal Code amendment. Again, you'll see that quite a bit of this has been deleted. This section where it's B 105.2, we're looking at the appendix now. Anytime you see something prefixed with the letter B or letter A or letter H or whatever the case may be, you're looking at an appendix of the international codes. In this case, we're looking at our fire flows. The minimum fire flow and flow durations, these are specific to the city of Salina, and these will remain as an amendment because they are very specific to our jurisdiction, because quite honestly, in certain areas, we are unable to meet the requirement as stated in the International Fire Code. We don't have that type of fire flow available. We don't have that kind of water pressure in certain areas. As such, this must remain as an amendment. And as such, it too will go back to the State Fire Marshal's office for approval as part of our amendments. Now, with all that being said, staff would like for a motion to us to move forward with it as written and submit this to the City Commission at a later date, or make a motion to make any changes as necessary as the board sees fit as we move forward with our 2012 code cycle and adoption process.
Well, I'd so move.
Second. We have a first and second to approve.
Sue, do you have something?
Jim offered two options. I'm not sure what Jim
Oh,
Ravenkamp
option.
motioned for.
For number one, to approve. Was the fire department involved in this?
Absolutely.
Okay, I mean, with the meeting? In the
Yes.
meeting? Okay,
The fire marshal's been involved, and our subcommittee's been involved, and there's been quite a bit of discussion on this.
okay.
And this is 100% in line with the fire marshals and City of Salina Fire Department's directive as well.
Good.
Okay, we have a first and second. All in favor?
All right.
Aye. Opposed? Same sign? Okay, motion approved.
Very good job.
Okay. Next on the agenda, zoning versus building code presentation.
Thank you. In this agenda item, basically this is informational only. It requires no action from the board. But basically, we just want to clarify the correlation and harmony between the zoning regulations and the building codes. And we're presenting this PowerPoint just as an educational item to that end. Quite often they overlap. It creates confusion and misunderstanding sometimes, and we want to keep in mind that a zoning regulation always addresses land use. And our building codes always address the construction of the building itself. Two things to keep in mind. That never changes. And I'll give you a little historical background on this too as we go forward. Now, let me switch to view, unless one wants to look sideways.
Or upside down.
I'm trying to challenge you a little bit.
Close.
We're getting closer.
One more time.
All right. Our zoning regulations versus building codes. We have to change the resolution too. Again, the important distinction between these two, while zoning regulations and zoning permits are always concerned with land use, building codes and building permits are exclusively for the structure itself. Now, you may receive a zoning permit that'll give you permission to build a home, a luxury home, but you still have to have that building permit to build it, to actually construct it. This gives you an idea of what we talk about when we say building envelope. Building envelope is basically what can I build on this land. Building envelopes includes our maximum building height, front yard setbacks, maximum lot coverage, rear yard setbacks, side yard setbacks from the property lines of the street. That is what you're allowed to build on the lot itself. Another zoning example, it gives you your buildable area. It's going to be within that area only that you can build. You cannot build outside of those areas. And basically, you can't be in violation of your setbacks. You can't be in front, rear, side, whatever the case may be. Our zoning codes regulate the type of structures that can be built in any given location, as well as how that structure interacts with the land it is built upon. New York City was among the first American cities to adopt the zoning codes. In 1916, in response to the construction of Equitable Building, which actually still stands at 120 Broadway, New York City adopted the first zoning regulations to apply citywide. This ushered in the country's first zoning code, which became the model for zoning regulations throughout the United States. If we go back in history, the first skyscraper in America was the Chicago Home Insurance Building. It was built in 1884, 10-story, 138 feet tall. Well, that was followed by what was called the Flatiron Building in New York City. In 1903, it was 22 stories, 308 feet tall. The Singer Tower in New York City was built in 1908. It's 47 stories at 700 feet. A lot more interesting history about this specific building. The Singer Tower was demolished in 1968 and is now the site of the present-day One Liberty Plaza, which we're familiar with. The ground floor of the One Liberty Plaza was used as a morgue during 9/11. Sad but true. Woolworth Building in New York City was built in 1913. It was 57 stories, 792 feet. And then we come back to our Equitable Building. So it took this long, and then we're finally getting to where maybe we need to adopt some zoning regulations. Equitable Building, 1916, 38 stories, 538 feet tall. The setbacks for this building, and you can still see it today, were the sidewalks. We're looking at the year of 1916 when there was mixed use, truly mixed use. You had residences, you had different type of structures around this, so the complaint started being, my gosh, they've blocked the sun. I don't even have sun in my yard anymore. I can't see the sky. I can't. So, and then we look at it now for this 38-story building in New York City. It's dwarfed. It's probably the smallest building there now, you know. But that's how we ushered in the zoning regulations. And this is a picture of the Equitable Building. And again, the sidewalk is a setback. What did we do before? Well, it was virtually unregulated. It was generally only by the building codes was it regulated. That controlled to some degree the building height, floor area, lot coverage, courts, windows. They had nuisance laws, restricted certain objectionable uses. Basically, they didn't want the slaughterhouse beside another sensitive use like housing. And then there were deed restrictions, which is deed restrictions versus zoning regulations is a separate PowerPoint I'll bring to you another time. Private agreements that were part of this property ownership, it limited its use by the owner. Bringing it in today, all developed countries around the world use some form of zoning in land and urban planning. They're sometimes referred to as your land use ordinance. They determine how you land within the cities, counties, parish, township, or develop for your residential, commercial, industrial use. It also governs the placement of alleys, driveways, easements, fences, garages, parking areas, signs, and even swimming pools. And that was a reference to me back when I had hair. Within each one of these zoning districts, there are guidelines governing how a building is to be located within the zone. They typically designate what bulk and densities allowed within each zoning district. Zoning regulations address floor area ratios, height, open space, yard setbacks, lot density. Basically, you know, your maximum number of buildings allowed per zoning lot. They also vary on the zoning district. The height and area allowances would be very, very different between a property that's zoned R1 single-family residential and C1 residential restricted business district. So what is the best use for that land? That's what we're looking at. What is the maximum size building, maximum height that you could put on here? What are the setbacks? That's all going to be controlled by zoning. And this is very much why zoning is so important. In almost all cases, applying for and obtaining the zoning permit is the very first step in the development process. An approved zoning permit is typically required as part of the application process for a building permit. It is best practice for anyone applying for a permit to check the zoning requirements before proceeding with the construction of a new structure. It is not wise to build a structure and find out you're in violation of zoning. That can be a very, very expensive endeavor if someone dares to do that. Or the renovation and addition to an existing one. You have to be very careful that you're not in violation of zoning. This process allows confirmation that the proposed projects are in compliance with the appropriate zoning for the applicable district. A project will typically not be granted a building permit without first obtaining zoning approval. You need zoning first. Now, once your approval is received from zoning, the very next step is to apply for and obtain a building permit. Again, the building code is exclusively for the structure itself, how it's constructed, life safety components, and accessibility. The distinction between the two, zoning codes govern land, again, and building codes govern the structure. You may have a zoning permit that will grant permission to build a car dealership or whatever it may be, but you must have the building permit that allows you to actually construct. There's your key difference between the two. I think this thing jumped about 3. Still trying to jump. Our building codes comprise a set of rules and regulations that govern the minimum construction for life safety, sanitation, accessibility standards for all structures, regardless of what the structure may be. Building codes are divided into different chapters and sections. They include classification or use of the building. Is it a factory? Is it a museum, office, school? Must be identified. Number of people, occupant load of the building or structure. How many people are going to occupy this structure for its specific use? The codes give us that information. The size and location of rooms, walls, floors, roof structures, stairs, hallways, plumbing, mechanical, electrical requirements, fire alarm system, fire sprinkler systems, accessible elements. These are all part of the building codes and building code process. Why do we have these building codes? It's throughout history that a lot of catastrophic events has occurred to make the building codes where they are. We could have kept, I would say, the original code of Hammurabi of 3000 BC, whereas if a builder built a house for a man and his work is not strong, and if the house he has built falls in and kills the householder, that builder shall be slain. Harsh but effective. We kind of got into the 21st century and we decided that may have not have been the best solution for building codes. And again, the catastrophic events from history, burning of Rome, Great London Fire, our recent, probably the most devastating one that changed most of the codes in the United States as we see them today was Great Chicago Fire of 1871. Great Chicago Fire, 1871, it occurred on Sunday, October 8th. It burned until Tuesday, October the 10th. 3.3 square miles destroyed. 300 plus people were killed. 100,000 plus homeless. And to this day, although it's never been proven, that Mrs. O'Leary's cow kicked over a lantern in the barn, it is still caused, I would say, great grief to Mrs. O'Leary and her family at the time, where she became quite the scapegoat for this. And if the truth was known, it was probably, as speculated, there was a few men in the barn at that time illegally gambling, so to speak, and it is thought that they were the ones that kicked the lantern over. At any rate, it was one of the most devastating fires in history. And the ironic part of that, in the year 1956, the O'Leary property became site of the Chicago Fire Academy, and it's still there. So it kind of puts it into perspective too. The Chicago Fire Academy now resides at the site of this. But again, I don't know if it was ever 100% proved that it was a cow, but the cow was blamed nonetheless for part of that. And as we emphasize that, building codes are in place to ensure the safety and well-being of tenants, our residents, our individuals who occupy the buildings and structures. And we take great pride in the city of Salina, and we should take great pride in the city of Salina, that we do indeed ensure the safety and well-being of every resident in this city with the construction that we are providing. Every one of us should take great pride in that. Again, the Great Chicago Fire of 1871, other examples of the reason that these codes have become stronger and stronger and continue to evolving process by establishing a code cycle every 3 years to help ensure the safest structures possible. And also to keep up with the technologies that we have. Again, outdated building codes, they don't serve anyone. The process that we are in, the code cycle process that we are performing at this time, it cannot be overstated how important, how truly important that is for the city of Salina and all of the residents and all of our structures and buildings here. Now we look at parking regulations and occupant loads. This can become one of a very confusing item too, as it relates to zoning and our building codes. Parking requirements and ratios are based on planning department conducting research. Institute of Transportation Engineers, they provide quite a bit of information on this that most jurisdictions use, as a matter of fact, as a starting point for these parking requirements. But where do you actually get the parking requirements? What are the parking requirements? How do you know how many parking spaces you need? One big factor, or several big factors into that, you survey the business owners, they usually have the best understanding as to what their customer needs are. You evaluate your local mass transit, determine how it affects your parking. Can we reduce the number of parking spaces because we have effective mass transit, those type of things? Understanding your climate, that you have mostly sunny, mild climate, or does inclement weather force people to drive because you can't walk, you can't bicycle, you can't commute? Those are all things to consider when considering parking. What type of drivers do we have? Shoppers we already know are short-term parkers. They are not there for long periods of time. Office workers, we are here often for many hours at a time. Usage times, can we share parking? For instance, can you share parking with the church or something like that to meet your needs during the week, whereas the church, they need their parking on the weekends or whenever services may be. Other things to consider when considering the parking. And also know that your parking requirements are established within the zoning regulation. The building code establishes the occupant load. Zoning does not do that. The building code establishes your occupant load. These two values often or almost always differ, whereas the occupant load can easily exceed that which is required by the zoning regulations for parking. As an example, if we take an occupant load for a typical restaurant at 2,400 square feet with tables and chairs, that would equate to 160 occupants. Now, per our zoning regulations here in the city of Salina, parking is calculated as one space for each 50 square feet of customer service, dining floor area, or one space for each 3 persons based on the maximum occupancy at design capacity, whichever is greater. In this case, one space for each 3 person calculates as being greater, thus the parking requirement would be 53 spaces. Now, what was the occupant load? 160. We need 53 parking spaces, not 160. That's where some of the key components come in. Building code, occupant load, zoning regulations, parking requirements. And here we just have examples of parking, configurations of parking, whether it's 90-degree parking, 40-degree parking, the distances between the parking spaces, a typical outline for parking. And here we are, zoning and buildings working together. We look at our building code issues. What are we going to address? Our type of occupancy, our type of construction, our maximum area per floor, number of exits, fire-resistant construction, fire suppression system, means of egress, accessibility, building materials, building systems. And our zoning, we're going to look at our zoning classification, permitted uses, conditional uses, maximum height of the building, maximum percent of the lot covered, setbacks, lines, front, rear, sides, parking and loading, signs, and also include the appeal process for that. Zoning regulations often parallel requirements as stipulated in the building codes as it relate to fire separation distances and building heights. And if we go back at the first part of when we started with the presentation for this PowerPoint, you remember the slide I showed you that there were no prior to zoning regulations, building codes were the authority that people were using as a governing authority as much as possible to regulate height, separation distances, and those types of things. So they do mirror each other in that regard to make sure that we have enough separation between each building. The height does not exceed that which is required by code and by zoning regulations. This oftentimes or most always going to result in our lower insurance costs and assurance that the life safety elements for the structure of the highest standards possible to protect the general public. And as I mentioned before, we should be quite proud, very, very proud in the city of Salina that I can assure you we do enforce the higher standards possible to protect our general public. And we'll continue to do so. In conclusion, our owners, residents, and builders sometimes may perceive these regulations and building codes a hindrance. But when owners, residents, and builders know what to expect before beginning the process of developing a property, submitting plans, or applying for a permit, they soon discover the benefits of having zoning and building codes working together to assure the safest and best built environment for the entire community. It's very, very important that they work together. And to see if you were paying attention, I have prepared a pop quiz.
I was asleep, I'm sorry.
And we can go through this together and just to get familiar with what it is. We look at number one, of course, if we could, you may not be able to see that. Let's see if we can enlarge that somewhat. Better?
Yes.
Number one, zoning ordinance normally defines specific uses for land that are permitted within a municipality. All of the following are designated uses in such ordinances except. Which one do you think is the exception? D is the correct answer. The purpose of our building permits is to, I hear a C. Does everyone think C is the correct answer?
Some people might think A.
I think that's it.
Believe me, that is not so. C is the correct answer. When planning a subdivision, developer Jamal should determine the kinds of land uses to be involved and amounts of land to be allocated to each use by considering which one? I hear a C.
Yeah.
C is correct.
That was when I woke up.
Our deed restrictions are created by all of the following except. What doesn't apply to a deed restriction? Remember that deed restrictions are over and beyond zoning regulation.
Statute.
That is correct. You were paying attention, sir.
Yes.
Which of the following is a variance? A is correct. Plat for a proposed subdivision is submitted to the That's correct. The municipality establishes development goals with its
B.
comprehensive plan is correct. The purpose of bulk zoning is to
B. No. Okay, A, B, C, or D.
A, B, C, or D.
C.
Let's try C. That's correct. Construction of a family room, additional bedroom, and extra bath has been completed on a new owner's home before addition can be used. Which of the following is true? C is correct. Now, this next one can be a little bit confusing. Stanley's in the business of buying large tracts of land and reselling them to consumers in small tracts. He is in business as a
Real estate broker.
Stanley is a subdivider. D.
Subdivider. And what's a subdivider?
He is in the business to buy large tracts and resell them in small tracts. He is a subdivider. He's not doing any building.
Yeah.
That is
More
confusing,
development.
yeah. Makes sense.
A subdivision was developed, and one of the deed restrictions covering all of the properties in the subdivision set aside the back 6 feet of each parcel as a combination greenbelt area and bicycle path. Homeowner Sylvia plans to convert the back 1/2 of her yard, including this set-aside space, into an organic garden. Her neighbor, Horace, can A, do nothing because individual homeowners have no authority in this matter, B, go to court and attempt to obtain injunctive release, C, force Sylvia to sell her property, or D, share in the profits from the garden. What do you think he can do?
B.
Okay.
Who said B? B is correct.
Yeah, but how can you do that when they have, like the city has control over that property?
Well, the deed restriction in this case was what she was in violation of. The deed restriction for that property that was set up over and beyond the zoning regulations established for that property. So when she
it's
goes
not
in
deed.
and signs her, or purchases that property, the deed restrictions go with that property, and when she buys that house, she needs to be aware of what deed restrictions, for whatever homes association this may be, that may not allow such things. Now, Loretta's in the business of buying tracts of land. Now, she's constructing buildings and making other improvements, and then selling them to the general public. She is in the business as a
Developer.
correct. She's the developer. Restrictive covenants. What did they apply to? D is correct. And the primary intent of zoning ordinance is to that was fairly easy. A is correct. The condemnation of private property for public use is allowed under the state's right of C. That is not often used, by the way.
Wow.
For the past 30 years, Joseph has operated a neighborhood grocery store. Last week, the city council passed a zoning ordinance that prohibits packaged food sales in the area where the grocery store is located. This store is now an example of an B is correct. He is a non-conforming use at this point. Deed restrictions may not legally control or limit that would be C. You will not do that. I actually worked in a jurisdiction that some of the old deed restrictions were still in place, and it would boggle your mind at what was written in those. Unbelievable. A town prohibits the developer from building more than 5 houses per acre in a subdivision. What's this restriction called?
B.
B is correct. It is density zoning. Lloyd owns a property next door to property that the city has condemned to extend the runways at the municipal airport. Lloyd feels his property has diminished in value due to this public use. He may seek compensation by an action of,
D,
that is correct, inverse condemnation. A tire company has a manufacturing plant located in an area that's just been rezoned for residential use. The company is allowed to continue operating the plant under the new zoning classification as non-conforming use. However, if the plant is destroyed by fire or other hazard, the tire company most likely will what? B is correct. It would be forbidden to rebuild a plant in that neighborhood under any circumstance. Would be unable to do so. I have a buyer, Martin, builds an outbuilding that violates the subdivision covenants mentioned in his deed. What may he do?
B,
B is correct. He may be sued and required to alter the structure or remove it. All of the following are examples of public land use control, except which one? C is correct. Restrictive covenants does not apply to that.
is this a 100 question test?
106, I believe.
Oh, okay.
No, I'm kidding. We're almost finished. Which of the following is true about land taken for public use? A is correct. Under existing ordinance, no signs that extend more than 3 feet above the highest point of a roof may be placed on any building. An owner wants to erect a 9-foot high revolving sign on the roof of his store. In order to do this legally, the owner must get a B. He must get a B, a variance. The Federal Institute Land Sales Full Disclosure Act provides that B is the correct answer on this one. Bill applies to the municipality for permission to open an adult daycare facility in his neighborhood. He may be granted a what? He would be granted a D, conditional use permit.
Yeah.
Controlled by zoning ordinances does not regulate. That's true. We do not regulate the price of the property. Regardless of what anyone may say. A wooded area with biking and hiking trails situated between old cotton mills and housing development. This area is considered a what?
Buffer zone. Utility easement. Okay,
It's a buffer zone. D.
yeah. Well, that's what I thought. You didn't answer.
A landowner constructed a building 7 stories high. Several years later, the municipality changed the zoning ordinance prohibiting buildings that exceed 6 stories in height. Which of the following is true regarding the existing 7-story building?
C.
We've already covered that one in a previous one. It is a non-conforming use. Permit's been issued for a contractor to construct a single-family residence in an approved R1 zoning location. While performing the footing inspection, it's discovered the southwest corner of the footing appears to be infringing upon the required side setback. What is the next step? A is correct. And with that, we conclude our presentation.
Well, how did we do? Did we pass?
You did pass. I kept close watch on that. You all did well.
Do we get an
Extra credit.
Yeah.
We may look at extra credit for something.
Well, I need some CEUs.
Now, our next Business is, and as other business, it was brought to my attention yesterday. Mr. Zucker has resigned from the Building Advisory Board. He is moving, be moving out of state. So therefore, we'll have a master electrician, I think, opening that we'll need to try to get someone to fill that opening. So if you know of someone, please let me know.
If you want. Yeah, I was Perez.
I will write down suggestions.
I mean, I'm happy to change because I do carry an electrical master.
Said Mr. Perez?
Yeah. Or you can look at Ron Stratman.
Who else?
Ron Stratman.
Let's see about getting an expression of interest form out to some of these individuals. Also, we need to, at this point, establish 2 subcommittees. One for the National Electric Code. Mr. Flory spoke with me today, and he volunteered already, and I'm not making this up, he actually did. He volunteered to serve on the National Electric Code Subcommittee. So there's one member.
I would like to, if that's possible.
Okay, Mr. Ravencamp. Who else?
Me, of course.
I would think.
I'll set in on that too.
Mark, are you just sit on all of them or what?
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know what's going on.
That's good.
I'm here for a reason.
Are you trying to find another job?
I'm trying to keep you in line.
So for this would be for the change between the 2005 to 2011 National Electric Code, which is NFPA 70, we all know, and our Salina Municipal Code's the same. Members of that subcommittee would be Mr. Flory, Mr. Ravencamp, Mr. White, Mr. Frazier, correct?
That's correct.
Now, so that we keep the ball rolling, let's go ahead and establish a subcommittee for the International Energy Conservation Code. You know, we save the best for last. So let's go ahead and establish a subcommittee for that.
I'm happy to if that's possible.
Okay.
I'll set in on that one so I can make them all.
I'd be in on that one also.
I would like to be on that one as well.
I think everyone wants to be in on that one.
I think so.
Let's
Just
make
gotta
a
hold
note.
that in.
Everyone wants to be on the International Energy Conservation Code. That would be Mr. Ravencamp, Mr. McCall, Mr. Bixby, Mr. White,
Said that would be in there.
Mr. Robinson, Mr. Frazier, and Mr. Miller.
I think Mike Flory would be like.
And
like
Mr.
said.
Flory, okay.
Yes.
Make a consensus across. That particular one, when we get to the International Energy Conservation Code, it's going to be more than one meeting, that's for certain. We already know that. Because we don't have a Salina Municipal Code amendments to an Energy Conservation Code, which we haven't established or enforced at this point. So it's going to be quite a lot of work for us.
Are you going to do the one committee first and then do the second one?
We're going to do the National Electric Code Committee first. And I will prepare those packets, and that would be the first National Electric Code Subcommittee meeting will be 2 weeks from today, 2 p.m., room 105, and that date will be, who's got their calendar?
October 27th?
Very good. October
So that's
27th.
two meeting,
That will be the first meeting of the National Electric Code Subcommittee. I don't anticipate maybe 2 meetings on that one at the most, and then we'll move straight forward into the Energy Conservation Code.
okay. So this looks like it'll be done before the end of the year.
That, I think so, yes. Now, whether it's completed and gone through the City Commission and all that presentation has been completed, We'll probably be close.
And has the city commission been kept updated on what's going on here?
They're aware of all of these meetings, yes. They're aware that all of this has been going on, and they're aware of how much work and how many hours have went into this, so.
I didn't know if they'd been, had been reading up on it as we go.
And I think Mr. Hobby keeps them apprised as well.
Okay, yeah, good, because that could take a long time for them to make a decision if they had to go.
Well, this is a lot of information, it really is, so,
Yes.
understandably so. And with that, I think that's all that I have. Turn it back over to the chair.
Okay, so any more questions for the staff?
No, I'm just glad and excited that Jim let me back on the
I'm
board.
proud to have you back. Did I say how proud I was?
Good. I resigned and then I.
It is good to have you back.
Forgiveness.
No more trees.
Okay,
Okay,
good.
Okay, if nothing else, meeting adjourned.
very good.